Mr. President, thank you very much for being here.
Happy to be with you, John.
Now, we're here at Delaware State University where you talked about college affordability, your student debt relief program, and we'll get to that in a moment. But we got to talk about some of the big news today, the biggest being the January 6th committee formally subpoenaed a former president, Donald Trump. There are a lot of issues involved here. Should he comply?
Well, look, I'm not going to opine on what he should do, but I think the committees handle it very well. And they've been straightforward and to the point, and it seems to me they would make sense, but I'm not going to get, because if I get in that, then they're going to, then it's, well, am I influencing the committee and the rest? So I've been very, very circumspect about anything I've been saying.
One more question on that, though. What would it say to the American people if he didn't testify, do you think?
Well, to a portion of them, they'd say, that's great. And to a larger portion, I think they'd say that was a mistake.
Mr. President, I'll be honest. I'm scared. Millions of Americans are scared. They're concerned about the concerted attacks on democracy, on voting, and how that's going to impact the midterm elections. We're seeing everything from Governor DeSantis's election police force arresting people for alleged violations of voter fraud. We're seeing election workers quitting because of threats. And then on top of it, you've got election deniers up and down the ballot running for election. A good chunk of them could win. So why shouldn't we be scared?
Well, I think we should be concerned. Look, there's nothing automatic about democracy. Remember when you're in undergraduate school, they talk about every generation has to protect democracy. Well, it really does. And I think we're at one of those inflection points in history where we've reached a point where there has been such a division that you have what I call the mega MAGA Republicans who are think that it's all right to threaten violence, think that's not inappropriate, talk about how they are concerned about security, but yet you saw what happened on January 6th. The whole world saw it. But I think there's reason for concern, but I'm optimistic about two things, Jonathan. Number one, we've been here before. And I believe that the essence of who we are as a nation, the soul of our country, is really about our commitment to the basic fundamental elements that make us Americans, which is the idea of fairness, decency, honesty, and I think is baked in to the majority of the American people. And I think as long as we take seriously the threat, I don't think the threat can come to fruition.
Well, on that point, Mr. President, there was a startling headline in the New York Times. Let's see if I can find it, where it said that a majority of Americans believe that democracy is under threat, and yet they don't see it as a priority, protecting democracy. I mean, why do you think that is?
Well, I think they do. I think under threat and their concern on other issues meld. In other words, you know, when they say it's under threat, they worry about basic rights being taken away. They worry about the idea that you can have a people in public life talked about one another the way they do with such bitterness. Look, you know, the organizing, we're unique in all of history. We're the most unique nation in the world. And I'm not trying to beat our chest about who we are as Americans. We're the only nation that is not built on ethnicity, geography, whatever. It's on a notion that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. We've never fully lived up to it. We've never walked away from it. And it's a core of all of this, I think, is that concern. It's a concern that you know, the soul is sort of the breath and the essence of who we are. And it ultimately gets down to not supporting violence, not supporting, making sure that you count the votes when they're cast, not intimidating anyone who's at the polls, not intimidating anyone who wants to vote. And I still think that's rock bottom core issue in America.
How did we get to this point, though?
Well, I think there are a number of things that happened. Number one, I think that we began to we had a leader who concluded that the truth didn't matter a whole lot, and used the modern version of the old racist kind of baiting that used to be the case, 40, 50 years ago in parts of the country. And I think it just, I don't think enough people took it seriously to begin with. And for me, what changed things for me was I hadn't planned on running again. And I think you know this. If I'm taking too much time, stop me. And when I saw those folks down in Charlottesville coming out of the fields, carrying Nazi swastikas, torches, singing the same anti-Semitic bile that was sung at the time in the 30s in Germany, and accompanied by the white supremacists, the young woman got killed.
Heather Heyer.
And they asked, and I talked to her mom, and when she got killed, and the president was asked, what did you think? He said, there were fine people on both sides. No president's ever said anything like that. And it's a reflection of this notion that whatever it takes to have power is appropriate. And I just find it disturbing. And I believe, though, that in 2020, for example, more people showed up to vote than any time in American history. I think they're going to do it again.
On that point about people being in it for power's sake, a far-right conservative person said earlier this month about the Senate race in Georgia, and I quote, "I don't care if Herschel Walker paid to abort endangered baby eagles. I want control of the Senate." You were in the Senate a long time, 1973 to 2008. You know that institution inside and out better than anybody probably who's ever served. And that time, you served with many Republicans.
Many conservative Republicans.
Right, super conservative Republicans. My question to you, though, Mr. President, is can our democracy survive when the Republican Party it only cares about power?
Well, look, I think that if we allow the Republican Party to continue to metastasize into what a minority of the party as a whole is, I think one of the reasons there's not more mainstream conservative Republicans running out there is because they are so concerned about not only their physical well-being, but also the notion that how can they win when a minority of Republicans are showing up to vote and they're really hard-edged. Look, I don't agree with anything that Liz Cheney believes about the substantive issues, but I admire the hell out of her. She means what she says. She doesn't support the notion of use of violence. She doesn't support the notion, she insists that there's basic fundamental rules. And it used to be that way all through the Senate. I mean, hell, I served with Jim Eastland and Strom Thurmond. I served with really conservative members of the United States Senate. But afterwards, after we'd argue like hell, we'd go down to the Senate dining room and everybody'd eat together. There was still an understanding that the differences may be profound, but they don't justify the kind of activities you're seeing today.
Well, you mentioned Congresswoman Cheney, who has battled a lot with now House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. He could be the next Speaker of the House if the Republicans take the majority. And he said about financial support of Ukraine that support for Ukraine, quote, "it can't be a blank check." In response, you said, among other things, these guys don't get it and they have no sense of American foreign policy. But given what Leader McCarthy said, should he even be Speaker?
Well, look, I can understand somebody having that view who's uninformed and believe it because it costs so much money to help them. We're spending a lot of money helping the Ukrainians. But it's so much more than the Ukrainians. It's about NATO. It's about Western Europe. It's about making sure that Putin is not able to succeed in a way that he is using the brutality of his activities. And I think that I just think it's about, again, this notion of power and either lack of knowledge or power. One of the two is the driving force, maybe both. But I don't know. Look, Jonathan, I think that this is not a referendum. This is a choice between what kind of country you want. Between, for example, do you let us, do you make sure that we're able to afford prescription drugs for people that are elderly? Do we have a circumstance where we're able to negotiate, Medicare is able to negotiate drug prices? Are we in a position where, and you go down the list of all the issues that are out there, and we know that, look, the Republicans have made it clear. First thing they want to do is most of them voted against the bill to reconstruct America through the infrastructure bill, highways, roads. You know, they all voted against, to a person, voted against the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides for environmental security and safety. And I mean, I just don't. They don't have a platform other than tear down what I've been able to do. We've been able to do, and I don't know what they're for.